Hello everyone, this is the first video in a series of videos on sketching polynomials, and we're going to be looking at sketching quadratics, cubics and quartics. This is the first one where we're going to be talking about sketching quadratic equations. Now, the first step in sketching quadratic equations is to factorize them, okay? So we've got some examples here that are already factorized, so we're going to assume that we've learned how to factorize them from a previous video. So when we are sketching quadratic equations, or indeed cubic equations, or indeed quartic equations, there are three questions I like to ask. So question one, I always ask, so let's write down the general form of a quadratic. ax squared add bx add c equals 0. So the first question I like to ask is, what is the coefficient in front of the x squared? If it is positive, the quadratic will be a smiley one. If it is negative, we will have the frowny upside down quadratic. Okay, so that's the first question. Which way up is a quadratic? Question two, when the x is equal to 0, what is the y? And the third question that we need to ask is, when the y is 0, what is the x? These three questions will help you to sketch a quadratic. So let's look at our first one, okay? In fact, no, you know what? Let's do 1b. I think 1b might be easier to look at. So we have got here x minus 2 times by 3x minus 1. And as I said before, the first thing you would have to do would be to factorize it, okay? But having factorized it, we're going to ask now our three questions. So the first question is, what's the coefficient of x squared going to be? In this case, it's going to be 3x squared, which is positive. So it's going to be a smiley one. Question two, when the x is equal to 0, what is the y going to be? So in this case, we would have 0 minus 2 times by 3 times 0 minus 1, which is minus 2 times by minus 1. So minus 2 times by minus 1 is positive 2. So therefore, it's going to intersect the y-axis when x is 0 at 2. So the coordinate of the point of intersection with the y-axis will be 0, 2. Okay, now, what is our third question? The third question is, when y is 0, what is x? So 0 is equal to x minus 2 times by 3x minus 1. So we imagine that each of these brackets is equal to 0, because the only way this can equal 0 is if we have 0 times something, or something times 0. So when you're doing this, you imagine that each of the brackets equals 0. So we would add 1 to both sides and divide by 3. So that would give us x is equal to 1/3. And here we would have x minus 2 equals 0. So x is 2. So we found out now the 2 points of intersection with the x-axis. So we can bring these three pieces of information now together to sketch our quadratic. Number one, it's a smiley one up. It crosses the y-axis at 0, 2, and it crosses the x-axis at the points 1/3 and 2. Oh, by the way, a question that students often ask me is, does it really matter about the scale? And the answer is no. When you're drawing a sketch, like notice, for example, I've put there 1/3 and I've put 2 there. That is clearly not to scale, okay? But that's not going to cost me any marks, because if it says a sketch, the marks are going to be for the shape of the curve and where having the correct points of intersection with the coordinate axes. So let's bring it all together. It's going to be a smiley one. It's going through all of these points, and that's where my sketch not being very good, but that's a sketch for B. Now let's do one more. Let's do a couple more. Let's do A. Now for A, what's going on is you'll notice that there's an X outside the bracket for 1A. And whenever you've got an X outside the bracket, it means the curve is going to go through the origin. So that's just something to be aware of. It's going to go through the origin. So here we go. So first of all, question one, what's the coefficient of the x squared going to be? It would be 2x squared. So that's positive, so it's a smiley one. Question two, when the x is equal to 0, what is the y? When x is 0, y is going to equal 0 in this case, because we're going to have 0 times by 2 times 0 minus 3, which is 0, times -3, which is 0. So it goes through the point 0, 0, the origin. And then number 3, we ask ourselves the question, when y is 0, what is x? And that means that we've got to think of x times by 2x minus 3 equals 0. So we need to think of either x is 0, or we need to think that 2x minus 3 is 0, which means that x would equal 3 over 2, because you add the 3 over to the other side and divide by 2. So we can bring all that information together now to draw our sketch. It goes through the origin, point 0, 0. It cuts the x-axis at 0, which we've already got, and at 3 over 2. So, and it's a smiley kind of one. So it's going to look like that. Okay, perfect. Now, the only other thing that they could conceivably ask you for is they could ask you for what is the coordinate of the vertex. Okay. Now, if they asked you for the coordinate of the vertex, there are two ways you could do that. You could either do it via symmetry and think to yourself, okay, there's 3 over 2, so I'm going to work out the point that is halfway in between there, and then work out the y value for whatever x value that is. Or you could complete the square, okay? Because you remember on our previous videos about completing the square, when you complete the square, that gives you the coordinate of that turning point, okay? So if a question asks you to sketch it, usually you only need to draw the shape and where it cuts the coordinate axes. It's not usually necessary to write down the coordinate of the turning point. However, if they do ask that specifically, say what's the coordinate of the turning point, you would need to complete the square, which we've got on a separate video, or you could just use a symmetrical argument and say, okay, if that's going to be 3 over 2, then this is going to be halfway along, and half of that is going to be 3 over 4. So you would take x is equal to 3 over 4, and you would sub it into the equation, okay? Which in this case, in 1a, the equation is x times by 2x minus 3 equals 0. So you would sub in x is equal to 3 over 4 into there to work out what the y value is. And that would give you the coordinate of the turning point. Okay, I hope that you found that video helpful. And that is how you sketch quadratic equations. The only thing I didn't mention is that if we have one that's got a negative, it would be the upside down shape. But you still ask yourself all the same questions. It's just that the graph would end up looking like that instead. Perfect. I hope you found that helpful, and I will see you in the next video.